A very good morning to all of you, and welcome to this talk conducted by Global Education and Training Institute. Today, in this talk series, we welcome Mr. Dr. Joy Andrew Lucido Santos, joining all the way from Thailand, Bangkok. He is a lecturer at King Mongkut's University of Technology, Thonburi, Bangkok. And today he is here and has joined us this Sunday morning to give us a very important and a very vital topic that has to be covered by him is creating gender expansive spaces in education. Before that, I would like to tell you about certain achievements of Dr. Joy Andrew. He is a social cultural linguist for the real world. He interrogates issues concerning language, semiotics, and space place making and their intersection with lived experiences such as gender and sexuality. He writes papers on lavender linguistics, social linguistics of sex tourism, and gender discourses. An ASEAN doctoral scholarship recipient, he holds an accelerated straight a 4-year program which he finished in 3 years. Yes, you heard it right. In 3 years, PhD degree in English as an international language. Currently, he is a lecturer at the School of Liberal Arts, King Mongkut's University of Technology, Thonburi, Bangkok. And here he is with us giving a very vital and important covering this topic through his presentation. And the topic is creating gender expansive spaces in education. Over to you, Dr. Joy.
Thank you so much, Sunita, and thank you, Getty, for your very warm and kind invitation. And I'm very much honored to be with you today. I'm going to share with you one of my research agenda, something that I feel so strongly about, something that I think is very vital, and as what Sumita mentioned, it's very important, particularly people within the academic institution. So I'm going to talk about creating gender expansive spaces in education. I just want to ask, is the slides on? Okay, there you go. Thank you. So in this particular lecture, I'm just going to mention just very few things. First, I'll talk about what is gender expansive. Second, I'll look into education as a gendered space, primarily on what are the different types of gendered spaces there are. And in a snapshot, I would share some of the insightful work that have been done in terms of creating a gender expansive spaces in education. So I'll begin. When we talk about gender expansive, what we're basically looking at is how can we accommodate people who do not belong within the binary, people who do not belong to what we call normal genders. As Wamstein 2021 mentioned, it's an adjective that can describe someone with a more flexible gender identity that might be associated with a typical gender binary. That means those people who do not see themselves as a man or a woman are those people who fall within the gender expansive definition. According to Roche and Gallo, they look at it as an umbrella term that describes individuals who extend a culture's commonly held beliefs about gender as it relates to a fixed binary. And that means they're looking into how particular gender is fixated and the social expectations there are, such as if you're a man, you're expected to be tough, you're expected to be strong, while you're a woman, you're expected to be soft, that the discourse of femininity. But gender expansive does not fall within such category. As what diversity style defines, it is a challenge to the cultural expectations regarding gender roles, identities, expressions, or norms, which means we look at gender identity or gender in general is not something that is corresponding to just one particular identity. When we say gender expansive, we're even looking into how fluidity happens, how someone explores his or her sexuality and later on gets to understand bits and pieces of who or she is and they. So there are several situations and processes that are involved in a gender expansive perspective. According to the Human Rights Foundation in 2018, it is even used to describe all cisgender and those who are non binary. And once we look at cisgender, as defined by Wamsley, it is an adjective that describes a person whose gender identity with the sex they were assigned at birth. That means if, for example, I see myself as a man and I have the biological makeup of a man, then I am a cisgender. And when we say not binary, this is a term that can be used by people who do not describe themselves or their genders as fitting into the categories of a man or a woman. And that means we're looking at cisgender and binary as something that we're trying to address when we talk about gender expansive. So we're looking at the non-binary, those people who do not fall within the man and the woman category. So from this definition, we're going to look at how education can actually be a gendered space. For example, in Woolley, he looks at education spaces in view of a neoliberal movement, which have become an active sites for the production of identity. What does that mean? This means whenever we look into education, particularly, let's say, in the curriculum, in the learning materials, there is this conceptions that are being formed. For instance, when a color is introduced, that blue is for males while pink is for females. And this association, the gender association with colors, feeds into that production of identity, production of binary identity. Another is when we look at professions, things that a woman and man can do. Normally those jobs that require leadership roles requires let's say more mentally or cognitively demanding jobs are always associated with men, while those domesticated um informed or influenced jobs are always assigned to women. That means, for example, when they look at those people who clean the house, those people who are doctors, who are nurses. So these particular representations in the academia, from the curriculum down to the learning materials to the language to the testing, all feed into that production of binary identity. And what's missing always, I mean, beyond the binary discourses, the problematization of gender roles of what can women do and what can men do, there it is also coupled with another problem, which is the erasure or the marginalization of the non-binary. That means those people who identify themselves as gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, um, and a lot more. So these have been quite a problem because the representation and the way education is being produced as a gendered space is always limited to the problematic binary system. And it is also focusing from a neoliberal perspective, it is a fertile ground in which the ideology of heteronormative binary gender can flourish and dominate social imagery. That means the construction of what a man can do and what a woman can do and their mere visibility to the minds create this social representation on who takes certain roles and who are acceptable in society, and this itself becomes a serious issue, and therefore it calls for a way to revisit how do we make spaces, how do we reconfigure an already gendered space. As We look at schooling practices and structures produce and reproduce the ideology of heteronormative binary gender, which shapes the possibilities for identity. That means a sense of belonging and community. That means from the point where this social imagery is constructed, there is already an expectation and, let's say, a standard that has been set in the minds of the people, whereas those who do not align themselves with these constructed identities become an outsider. They become kicked out from the system, and they don't have that sense of belongingness. In contrast, those people who aligns themselves do not just embrace that sense of belongingness, but also expect to have willed a particular power against those who do not belong to such community. And so education is a very crucial space for gendering. And with this, let's look at how gendered spaces are. When we talk about gendered space or how a space is gendered, we're looking at how spaces are designed for and associated with one specific gender. From what I mentioned earlier, looking at the binary as a model, they become um, they become a standard as to the spaces are assigned to only man and women or man and women. And that means this binary system creates an association of space and specific genders. It's also defined by Macy that it is a constellation of space, place with gender, which is inscribed via body practices in the production of spaces. And this is where we try to see how a space is actually gendered, how gender identities is used as an artifact to create or to purport certain degrees of identities, which becomes an associated, an ingrained identity of a particular place. Alzir, for instance, tried to investigate this further from that gendered spaces to zooming into the what kinds of gendered spaces are there and how are they being done. In this respect, there are three different types of gendered spaces. Number one is called generally gendered spaces, which are initially established to cater one gender, like women's schools and universities. So this is quite common when you look at academic institutions that are dedicated to specific gender. That means this is an all-girls school. This is an all-boys school, and that means the clarity on how the school is gendered is already well established, and this is what Alzir called as generally gendered spaces. There's also a second one, which is the absolutely or strictly gendered space, which includes those spaces that are solely created for and strictly utilized by one gender, like toilets or fraternity clubs. These is, let's say, a more issue in educational sector, not only in public spaces. When we talk about accessibility of toilets, where there is always a clear identity or clear purpose on which gender group this particular toilet serves. And there is this, gender neutral spaces, gender neutral bathrooms or gender for all toilets. But these are not existing within that strictly gendered space. And this is when we will experience people kicking out others because they are entering a strictly um, allotted space for a specific group. And the last is conditionally gender spaces, which are spaces that are gendered based on certain conditions. And this is a ground for other people to modify or to reconfigure spaces in accordance with the conditions they're going to set forth. And that means this becomes an open avenue for people to re-examine and even evaluate how can they carefully put gender identities in certain spaces with certain conditions. And these are crucial. For one, it allows us to basically understand the expectations there are in given spaces. Number two, it also affords us with the kind of behavior that are expected of us. And that means if the space is a strictly or absolutely gendered space, if someone enters a particular toilet which is not primarily assigned to them, you understood that there are problems, there'll be repercussions. In the same way, once you look at generally gendered space, this is when you can say that, okay, this is not the space basically for me. In other words, it provides us a clear understanding on where we can position ourselves. But then again, what is crucial here and what is more interesting here is how the conditionally gendered space are constructed, and how can we modify the conditions in accordance to the benefits of all. And this is when we're trying to talk about how do we create gendered spaces or gender expansive spaces. Chapman has offered quite a very exhaustive and very clear paper on gender expansive from a more post-structuralist perspective. And I am citing his work, which pretty much encompass all the existing literatures on how we can establish gender expansive spaces. And this is what he calls enabling discourses. Basically, in this enabling discourses, we're looking at three different processes or three different discourses. Number one is equity and inclusion. Number two, deconstruction of binaries. And number three, collaborative practice discourse. When we talk about equity and inclusion, this is pretty much the expectations that people have, that it has to be more welcoming, it has to be more accommodating, it has to be more inclusive. In other words, we're looking at the discourse of gender neutral spaces. This means that we open toilets that are mainly dedicated to all groups, regardless of their gender. We're looking at spaces that promote um, uh, equal access to all. It could also be through a linguistic part where we offer different linguistic items that could be used by different individuals, such as if they view themselves as someone who belong to the binary, then they can use the he or she pronoun. But if they feel like they do not belong to the binary, then there is a linguistic item that is assigned for them to use, which is they, the singular they, the non-binary they. Basically, the gender neutral spaces is not limited to physical spaces, but also in other areas such as language, which is very crucial in identifying oneself. This means having gender neutral spaces does not only provide welcoming, promotes equality, purports inclusion, but also it allows people to design and to be identified to the way they want to, rather than to be misgendered due to the limited items or limited tools available to them to gender themselves. Another is discussing gender in classes. That means when you talk about, for instance, what particular job can people use, and or can what particular jobs can people pursue, and that means you can say that being a doctor is open to all, whether you are a gay man, a gay woman, a transgender woman, a transgender man, whether you are a straight woman or a male heterosexual, a female heterosexuals, there has to be that discussion in a way people become more comfortable discussing them. And the more you discuss them, they establish that notion of openness. They establish that notion of acceptability. And because of this, it now leads to the third point, which is promoting respect to all genders. That means when you are able to see such discussion happening, you're also opening up opportunities to others, regardless on how they present themselves. And therefore, you get to respect how they present themselves as professionals. For instance, a trans woman wearing dresses or attires that that she identified herself or he identified himself with, then there is respect. We are no longer in the phenomenon when our existence is always in question. And this is very crucial once you look at the equity and inclusion. Another is the deconstruction of binaries. When we talk about deconstruction of binaries, we're looking at how can we challenge those cemented identities of what women and men can do. Similar to what I discussed earlier, but this time we're looking at a more, how do we say, a more challenging um, uh, aspect in terms of not just representing, but trying our best to deconstruct and hopefully to annihilate such binaries. That means in school activities, we allow people to participate. If we're talking about a school play who wants to play as a doctor, as a pirate, as an engineer, they are not limited to a particular group of gendered individuals. They have to be open to those people who are capable. And that means gender becomes, I mean, gender is no longer a qualifier for their participation. Gender is no longer a prerequisite for their inclusion, for their involvement. And this promotes the second point, which is the avoidance to derogatory gendered remarks. For instance, when we talk about being an engineer, there is this constructed identity that they're tough, they are they're masculine, and therefore when a woman or a trans woman take on a role, they will not be ridiculed or even demeaned by, you're too girly for that role, you're too feminine for that act. And so this, derogatory remarks, whether they are intentional or enveloped in a more microaggressive way, we're able to prevent them because from the starting point of discussions on gender, from the equity and inclusion down to opening activities to all, is about deconstructing. Not no We're no longer challenging them, but we're trying to get rid of the tall walls that have been built, which intended to really divide on the capabilities that a specific gender can have. And this is very crucial if we really wanted to promote higher learning, if we wanted our students to reach their highest potential, then gender should never be a prerequisite. The next point is collaborative practice discourse, and this is when we look at the move not as a teacher's job alone, but it also involves several stakeholders, and that means we invite parents. We do not just stop the promotion of gender expansive spaces within the classroom, but we also invite those concerned stakeholders to participate, to cooperate, to collaborate. In this way, we're not just instilling those seeds of gender expansive understanding, but we're also watering them. We are nourishing them. And this also means that we have to do the same, not just in our mere act, but also in our mere practice, such as revisiting the curriculum, looking at how gender representation has been done, looking at how we assess our understanding of gender and sexuality, how we uh, define the capabilities of different genders. So this means that it requires so much work in the sense that we have to be able to engage everyone in our goal to provide these spaces for others. Another important and crucial point is the adoption of holistic practice approach. When we say a holistic practice approach, we're not just talking about the lessons. We're not supposed to be dealing with the cognitive alone, but we're also dealing with other aspects such as emotion, personal, social, spiritual well being. This will help us to not just, let's say, introduce the concepts, but to make it like a way of life. And in this particular case, the goal in making gender expansive more understandable and for it to be really effective is to target all of the aspects. So everyone will get to understand that this is something serious, that this is something that is crucial, and therefore approaching it in a more holistic way paves the way in having that it's not just growing awareness, but we're actually our aim is to establish stronger roots. And we can only do that by having a holistic approach, by following the enabling discourses. And it's pretty much understandable that there are certain concerns that a lot of people would have, or what Chapman calls the innocence discourse, specifically if we're talking about young learners. Previous literatures would say that children start gendering at the age of 7. This means that they're able to distinguish what do they want. Do they want to have hairpins? Do they want to play with the balls? Do they want to put on makeup? So this is where the decision making is done. However, while this is truly acknowledged that the innocence has to be considered, we also have to realize that this innocence is also an opportunity for them to open their awareness that these are not gendered, these are not sexualized, they're all humans, regardless of their expressions. They will not be confused because if we follow the way their brain operates and the way we understand it is that what we feed becomes part of their long-term memory. What we feed to them becomes part of their consciousness. And therefore, if we start planting or once we start seeding in this discourse of gender expansive spaces or gender expansive understanding, then we're actually helping them to become even more capable of understanding of becoming catalysts for change. And this is something that people have to consider specifically in academia as we're trying to think of gender as not as a restriction, as not as a limiting identity, but it is something that is part of someone's way of life. It is the way someone wishes to represent or to present himself. And thus, we are able to see capabilities, talents, skills as something that is human's capacity, not gendered alone. So this provides us opportunities such as we are able to create safe spaces because we have safe spaces. Students will be free to express themselves. People would be able to establish harmony. They are not able. They wouldn't have to constantly battle hate, and therefore we're promoting diversity and acceptance, not hate, not violence, not tolerance, but diversity and acceptance. That said, we're focusing on how these creation of gender expansive spaces would help not just the teachers, but also students, parents, stakeholders, administrations, to really help society to move into, let's say, a more positive direction, that gender is not a limiting aspect, but it is actually a form of identifying ourselves. And so it is crucial that we have to understand that gender expansive work is not a one person's job. It requires support at the whole center level. That means if you really wanted this to become a serious act, a serious move, therefore, we've got to invite everyone to participate, everyone to contribute, everyone to join in. And that means understanding what gender is and how it is different to sexuality, understanding how gender expressions do not cause harm to anybody. That gender neutral spaces or gender expansive spaces is not intended to cause harm but to establish harmony. And if we're also able to instill gender expansive discourses to students, then we are able to map a very clear route to real social change. And if we're going to focus on how we can do this, you'll have to focus a lot on how do we see ourselves? How do we see gender and sexuality? Because our opinions and our perspectives will be rooted from our belief system. Our belief system that is co constructed by our experiences, by our education, by our exposure, by the way we see things. But how can we minimize the anticipated subjectivity? This is when we establish tools to minimize the subjectivity and try to use them to establish objectivity. That means we're able to use these tools to understand what gender is, what just gender expansive does to students, does to society, and does to everybody. And if we're able to see that gender expansive discourses is not a threat, it's not a doomsday like. It's more of an opportunity to open more doors to more people, to open more microphones for more people to be heard. And indeed, it starts at home, but the classes, education, the classrooms, the teachers, their classmates take part in that crucial development stage where we're able to help students to really understand themselves, the society, and what particular role they need to take on the moment they step out of the university, of the schools. And this is one of our responsibilities. If we are to look at education as a way to move forward, as a way to really help individuals to become better citizens. Sometimes we don't need to become better. We just need to be good. And I think one way to do it is to start talking about how can we build safe spaces to individuals? How can we um, diminish those acts of criticisms, those hates. And it all starts by just basically opening up the discussion on gender expansive discourses, looking into how can we best help them. And by doing so, we'll be able to create a safe space for all genders. And with that, I'm open for questions and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joy Andrew. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Joy Andrew who had given such a vital discourse over a very important topic, creating gender expansive spaces. You did mention about how we all can contribute in promoting diversity. And as we know that we have begun to raise our daughters more like sons, but now it's time to, have enough courage to raise our sons more like daughters. So to remove that disparity and to let everyone know that how good it is to be equal, to be human. And it's all about seek no gender, hearing no gender, speak no gender. It's all about speak about human values, speak about human equality. So, as stakeholders, and especially when we take into consideration the role of the teachers, Mr. Andrew, I would like to have your views over the challenging roles of a teacher in maintaining and establishing harmony. What's your take? What's your call over it?
Thank you very much. And that's actually a very important question. I think as a teacher myself, I think one of the main issues that we need to address is who are we? Because our identity will really impact the way we see things. For example, I'm an openly gay person, and it might be too self serving for some if I operate on that. But if I position myself as a human being to see everybody beyond their biological makeup, beyond their gender expression, I think that will be a lot better because we see them as humans, as what you mentioned, being human is actually being better than being, than promoting hate. So I think one of the challenges that teachers need to face is first understand their positions in the classroom, and we can do that by knowing who we are, our own identity. Second, we should try to avoid discourses that feed into toxic heteronormative binaries. We do not say, oh, that's too girly, oh, that's too manly, or you can say, oh, don't wear pink, it's for boys. So we stop doing that. And maybe instead of saying hello, boys and girls, maybe we can have a better opening that would welcome all expressions in the classroom. And I think the last point is in the classes, in the lessons, in the curriculum, in the assessment, in even the way we present ourselves, it's important that we model gender expansiveness. That means we do not promote divisive discourses. We do not promote superiority of a particular gender group over the other. And I think by doing that, we'll be able to become not just better teachers, but better humans.
Thank you very much for addressing that question. And ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Joy Andrew Lucido Santos joining this morning, Sunday morning, all the way from Thornbury, Bangkok. And for more such talks, you can log into our Getty to partner with us. You can join us, the Disruptive Education Movement, which is led by Global Education and Training Institute. And please mail us at scaleup@globaldream.guru, or you can even WhatsApp or call us at 91740 840 6000. Till we meet next in any other such talk, which is conducted by Global Education Training Institute, it's Sumita Bhatt signing off for now. Thank you very much for joining this morning.